Good morning. Good morning, guys. This is
Good
Mike
morning.
and Melanie.
Hi.
And you saw
Hi.
Jessica and Puppy just a second ago. And I've asked Mike and Melanie to come on the call to share with us. As a church, we've been going through the book of Job for the last 5 weeks. We have been learning through Job's story what it means to suffer and to still trust in the Lord. And Mike and Melanie have been through quite an ordeal over the last 5 or so years. And so they're going to share that with us this morning. And I do hope that as they share with us, you won't just be touched by it, but that you will be encouraged hearing this story, hearing of God's faithfulness, and hearing of their response in the midst of all of this in their lives. So guys, it's your story, not mine. So I don't want to take anything away from it. I'm just going to hand over to you and ask you what happened, and just let you take it from there.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks for inviting us. Can you guys hear us okay?
You're 100%.
Okay. Well, thanks. Yeah, it's the first time we're telling this story, so just be with us as we work our way through it. So on the 16th of December, 2016, James, our 5-year-old son, passed away from cancer. Up until then, we thought we were sort of an average, happy Christian family. We had our 2 kids, James and Jessica, who at the time were 4 and 6 years old. It was a very cute age for kids, and we just felt like a complete family. James and Jessica played beautifully together, and they loved dressing up as mommy and daddy and pushing their pram around with their kids, Luke and Mary. And he was just a happy boy. He always had a good sense of humor. He spoke from the heart. He was a very honest little boy. And he was also brave, sensitive, and very loving. He loved hugs and cuddles. And he loved playing with his Lego, his toy cars, and trains with Grandpa. But in 2015, our lives changed forever. Little did we know that what was about to happen to us would push us beyond what we thought we could handle.
So it all began when I picked James up from school on the Friday afternoon. James had knocked his head on the jungle gym and seemed a bit unstable on his feet. James's school teacher had also commented that he seemed a bit unstable throughout the day. We phoned our doctor that afternoon, but he couldn't see us on the Friday, so he said he'll come around on the Saturday afternoon. He arrived on the Saturday afternoon and he did all the checks, and he said to us that James needed a CT scan. James and I drove to Vincent Pallotti that evening. My mom joined us at the hospital while Mike stayed at home with Jessica. At the hospital, James was very brave. He climbed onto the CT machine with clutching his blankie, and there was no issues. He just showed himself to be so brave. After the scan, the neurosurgeon came across to chat to my mom and I, and he had a worried look on his face. And I just knew things were worse than what we had anticipated. He indicated that they picked up a mass in James's head, in his cerebellum, and that he would need an operation. My mind was racing and my heart was beating so fast. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was just, the news was just too much to handle. I turned and faced the other way just to make sure that James wouldn't see me upset. How could this be true? These things happen to other people. I was just beyond myself. It all just suddenly made sense, because the cerebellum controls the balance and movement. And this is why James had been experiencing issues with his balance the week before. It was also amazing how James had never once ever complained that he had any headaches. That night, James was admitted straight to hospital as he had excessive swelling on the brain. And it was just such a shock to us, because just a month before this whole ordeal had started, we had been on holiday in Knysna, and the kids had been jumping on trampolines, riding bikes, and there was no hint that anything was wrong with James.
So the following morning, we went to the radiology department for a detailed MRI scan, and we got the good news that the tumor hadn't spread to the spine, which was a concern, but he did need to have an operation as soon as possible. So we sought a second opinion. We went to Professor Figaji at Red Cross Children's Hospital. He's the head pediatric neurologist. And just dealing with him and talking to him, we knew that James was going to be in good hands during the operation. Unfortunately, we had to wait 2 weeks because there was a neurologist conference overseas, and Professor Vigaji was going to that. So we had to wait for that time, which was quite concerning because we were worried that while he was away, the tumor would just grow and expand further into his brain. So, but on the 11th of August, James had an 8-hour operation on his brain at Red Cross. And thankfully, the entire tumor was removed. They got everything out because seizures, strokes, the inability to walk and talk are some of the side effects of an operation on the brain. And so there was a real concern for us at how he was going to come out. But thank God he came out with absolutely no side effects. He actually, as they were rolling him out of the theater, he was already mumbling "mommy." And 8 days later, he was in the hospital, he was able to walk again. So we were really so grateful that it was a good turnout after that operation. Next came the results of the tumor. The news was not good because the histology was that it was a very aggressive cancerous tumor.
Yeah, it was actually an anaplastic medulloblastoma. It was one of the most aggressive and high-risk tumors, one of the worst types, we were told.
Yeah, that was not the news that we were hoping for because we've been praying so hard for it to be benign. And we're filled with anxiety now because only 60% of children actually survive after having a high-risk tumor like that. So a few days later, he had another operation to insert a Broviac line, which is a line they put into his chest. So when it comes to sedating him for radiation, they can just inject straight into that line. They don't need to inject into his arm all the time. But then we also got more tests back that showed that he had cancer cells in his spinal fluid. And that means they had to increase the dose for radiation.
So radiation started. There were 30 sessions for 6 weeks. We had to go to Grooteskier, be at Grooteskier by 7:30 a.m. every morning. Just the thought of that just overwhelmed us. During radiation, it was absolutely heartbreaking to see how James's hair, he started losing his hair. His skin was burnt on his head and his chest and his back. He had extreme nausea and vomiting, and he was hardly eating. During the 6 weeks of radiation, James had to be admitted to hospital at least 3 times for them to put down a nose tube to get some food into his stomach. His weight dropped from 22 kilograms down to 14 kilograms. I remember having to give James Neupogen injections to increase his white blood cells, but he was just so brave. It was amazing to see how he was so brave through it all. He used to actually remind us in the evenings, "Mommy, I need my injection." And we used to, as a family, sit around the dining room table, and we used to, he used to, sorry. Jessica used to sing to him, and I used to just inject him, and he used to sit on Mike's lap.
A few months later, the chemo started.
Guys,
so that lasted 6 months, and it was very exhausting and painful, both physically and emotionally. As again, we were reminded by the doctor that all the dreadful things that can go wrong during the operation, like like permanent hearing loss, kidney failure. But thankfully, God did bring James safely through it. The
final MRI scan was due 2 weeks later. We felt confident that the results would be clear because he had just been through this intense treatment. It had been 8 months. We had intense radiation, had intense chemo, and we thought to ourselves, no, everything will be clear. The results took much longer than expected, and finally we received the news. We were absolutely shocked. The results were not clear. They had picked up another nodule on the tumor bed, and James's oncologist said that he needed an operation as soon as possible and that he would need further treatment. This also wasn't good news because the doctors had told us that this would greatly reduce the chance of James's survival because the tumor had returned so soon. I was absolutely fearful. I was beyond myself, and but all I can say is I could feel God standing there saying to me, I will never leave you, I will not forsake you, I am in control.
So then a week later, he was admitted for his second operation, and it was a gloomy day, just it was as gloomy outside as it was inside. And it was another 6-hour operation, but thank God again, he came out of the operation with absolutely no side effects. And 7 days later, we left the hospital. But the next day, the oncologist called us with the news that his spinal fluid was clear and that what they thought was a new tumor growth was in fact scar tissue. So no further treatment was needed. We were beside ourselves. We were overwhelmed. We just couldn't believe that now finally it was clear and everything was okay. Finally, life could return to normal. Over the next couple of months, James got stronger. He started to pick up weight again. We went away on holiday. He started going back to school, and this is where we thought, now this is it. This is where our story ends, because James was healed.
So it was late November, and I picked up James from school one Friday afternoon, and he was complaining of back pain. During the course of the afternoon, the pain got worse, and so I phoned our doctor, and our doctor said, no, you must take James down to Melamed to get an X-ray. So James and I went down to Melamed, and we had X-rays done. I can't tell you how terrible it was to wait for those, because we'd been waiting for so many other results, and just to wait for these was just terrible after we'd come to the end of what we thought was this journey. My heart was pounding, my mind was racing. What if this is a relapse of the cancer? We waited and waited, and the X-rays came out, and the X-rays were clear. James and I still looked at each other, and we chuckled to ourselves, because all the X-rays showed was a little bit of gas in his bum, and we were just like chuckling. It was something to, just make light of the situation. So the next day we returned to Red Cross, and James's oncologist did a full examination of him and said he needed another scan. This time the scan took 3 hours. We went to the Panorama Mediclinic, sorry, and the scan took 3 hours because they needed a real detailed scan. It was the most anxious time of our lives because it was extremely hard waiting for more results. By late that evening, James's oncologist called with the news. I mean, it was such a time of anxiety in our lives waiting for that phone call. But when they phoned, all I heard was the word clear. They basically said the scan has come back clear. There's no evidence of any tumor or anything in his brain nor his spine. And I just felt this relief, this feeling of relief wash over me. It was just like a heavy burden had lifted off my shoulders. We were just beyond ourselves. However, the doctors were still puzzled as to what was causing his immense pain. At this stage, James was needing to use a wheelchair at home to move around, and his pain was getting worse by the day.
So on the 8th of December, then James' oncologist had arranged for James to have a lumbar punch and a bone marrow biopsy. The lumbar punch thankfully came back clear, but we had to wait quite a while for the biopsy results. In early December, James woke up one morning. He was just in excruciating pain, so we had to rush him off to Red Cross Hospital, where they put him on morphine. The next day, we were called into the oncologist's office for a meeting. The bone marrow results were back, and the cancer had metastasized to his bone marrow, and there was nothing they could do for him. He would never walk again. This was not the news we were expecting. We were just shattered, and we just broke down. We couldn't believe that after coming all this way, this is now where we were. This was the news we were getting. So we asked the question, how long do we have? And they said until Christmas, or at least maximum 2 months. And they told us that on the 14th of December. By this stage, we were finished. We had no more energy. We couldn't fight. We couldn't pray. When we did, we just prayed, Lord, your will be done, because we know ultimately that is what's going to be done. It's his will.
So it was the 15th of December, and we were hoping to go home that day from hospital. And I was sitting outside Red Cross Children's Hospital getting some fresh air, and James's oncologist came running out to me saying, you need to come now. Your son is dying. You need to come sit with him. He's dying. And I just couldn't believe what I was hearing, because just the previous day we had a meeting with the oncologist, and they had said that he still had 2 months with us.
We called all the family, and everyone close to him came to visit. Unfortunately, this was the first and only time Jessica was actually allowed in the hospital to see him. Up until then, she wasn't allowed. Kids under 12 weren't allowed into the oncology department. it was the first time. By the evening, he seemed to have improved. We thought he was actually okay. And then 12:30 that night, Mel actually put on a Christmas CD, and he was just enjoying listening to some of his favorite Christmas songs. And we were both exhausted, so we hadn't had much sleep. And so we rolled our beds closer to his just to get a bit of rest. And while we were there, we were just singing to him and talking to him. But his breathing was just so heavy. It was like a tractor. We couldn't rest. And we just kept praying for a miracle, and that he would calm down, and that he would open his eyes.
Yeah, and the most painful part is the fact is that we couldn't even climb in the hospital bed with him because he was so sore. We hadn't been able to cuddle him for at least a week because of the amount of pain that he was experiencing in his body. Around 3:15 a.m., James started playing with his catheter bandage and plaster, and he pulled it off. So we were worried that he'd pull out the catheter. So I was about to run out of the room to go and ask the nurse to come and sort it out. And Mike said to me, "Wait, don't go. Something's happening." And James's breathing suddenly got calmer and quieter, and then it got shallow, and then he suddenly started gasping for air. And at 3:20 a.m. he passed away. He was gone forever. I watched in utter horror. Mike was holding onto him crying, and I just ran out the room to go and call the nurse.
But, yeah, it was a very surreal moment, but it was amazing that right at that moment when he took his last breath, I just realized that he was with Jesus, that although his body was there, he was with Jesus. So we never experienced anything as traumatic as that. And then it was like life just had to carry on. We just had to pick up his stuff, like pack all his toys and clothes away. And then we packed all our stuff while his body just lay there. And then while we were leaving, the nurses were coming in with muslin cloth to wrap up his body. And at 4:30 in the morning, we drove out of Red Cross, and we just drove. We didn't know what to do. We didn't know where to go, and we just didn't want to go home. Unfortunately, although his suffering had ended, ours continued. And that's pretty much where we were up until there.
Guys, that is an incredible story. When you hear a story like that, you think to yourself, but hang on, that's not supposed to happen to a good Christian family, is it? How does that take place? And yet when we listen to your story, we know that is the reality of the world that we're living in. I think there's so many questions that we could ask. There's so many avenues that we could go down and explore in all of this. But maybe we could just, in this, how did God show his faithfulness during the course of the journey? How did he sustain you along the journey as you were going through it? Because, I mean, you're still standing. It's 4 or 5 years later now, and you're still Christians. You're still trusting in the Lord. Can you just share a little bit of that part of the story?
So we were uplifted daily in prayer, and I think sometimes we could actually sense that we were just being carried in some of the difficult times by family, friends, and people we didn't even know were praying for us. Our sister-in-law had set up a Facebook page, and there were people all over the world actually that were following and posting. While we knew that God wouldn't necessarily answer our prayers where we wanted him to, we knew that he was doing what he needed to do, and that we could trust him in that. Thankfully, throughout that whole time, Jessica, Melanie, and I were healthy. God kept us healthy throughout. There were times when we had to be very careful with him being infected, and yet thankfully we were always okay. We were always healthy, so there's never that risk from us. But I think one of the big thing when God showing his faithfulness was God using people. It was the people. We saw God in people. The people that were posting on Facebook, they would send us messages of encouragement via WhatsApp. from our church, Takai Community Church, the amount of meals they provided for us, lots of other ways that they were assisting, and they hosted an event for us called Jumping for James, where they helped us raise funds to cover the expenses that we couldn't cover. Graham from our church was there in the last few days. Mervyn and Alison from St. James filled in for Luke because Luke was away, and they were just such a comfort to the kids the day before, just telling Jessica and the cousins what was going on. Mervyn spoke to James beforehand, and it was just such an encouragement to us during that time. And in Yvonne, who had been through a really tragic loss themselves, walked a lot of that road with us, and they were such a huge comfort to us during that time. We prayed a lot during this ordeal, but we don't measure his faithfulness by the way he answered our prayers, because James died. That wasn't the answer. It wasn't the answer we were looking for. But sometimes his answer was yes, and sometimes it was no. But we knew he was always there, and he was in control, and that's, he loves us. He was doing what he knew was best, and that was a massive comfort to us when things were going really pear-shaped. We just knew that he was in control.
Let me just interject there for a second, because I think that really is important, what you've picked up. And I don't know if you've got any additional insights on that. And if you don't, it's fine. But just that we do pray. We, as Christians, we pray trusting the Lord for a miracle. We pray for healing. Those are all good and right things to pray for. And yet, like you just said, you don't always get the answer that you prayed for. And for some people, that can be a real struggle. That can really put them off of God, but God, I prayed for this and I didn't get it. Do you have any insight in how were you able to be I know you mentioned it was you knew that God was in control. You knew he was good. You knew he was merciful and compassionate. But I mean, do you have any insights just on how you're able to be at peace when he didn't answer your prayers the way that you prayed them?
But I think it was just being aware that he was in control. I don't know how, and also having an eternal perspective, not on this. One of the things that really came to light for me was when James died. I thought, Lord, after all the suffering he's been through, after all that he's been through, and you let him die. I thought, how can you do that? And it was only later I thought that was actually the best thing that he could do. What better reward could he have for all the suffering he went through? And he goes to be with Jesus. You can't beat that. And so yeah, it was the best thing that he could do for James. It really was.
Mike, I think. Sorry. I think that's so profound. Anyways, you guys carry on.
Just one thing that really stood out to me afterwards was the crucifixion, in that I used to just read the crucifixion as it was an event that happened. That's what Jesus went through. And so when I would question our suffering, I would think, but look at this, look at Jesus, the amount of suffering he went through. He was this God's son, and yet God let him suffer like that. And I think, this is nothing in comparison to what he went through. And I also thought about God. God is sitting in heaven watching his son suffer. How terrible that must have actually been for God to watch his son suffer. Although it was to bring about good, he still had to watch him suffer. And although he could do something about it, he knew he mustn't, for good to be done. And we're just praying that through this suffering that some good will be done. Yeah.
I think also from my side, when James started radiation, God was really faithful to us. He allowed a number of people from TCC as well as Southern Cross Church to provide little wrap gifts for James every morning that we were able to give to him in the car on the way to radiation. And we were so ever so grateful for that, because he would be so excited to get in the car every morning, and it was 6 weeks we had to travel in the car, and he was excited every morning. So we really are grateful to those of you who did send those little gifts, because it helped immensely. My parents were such a great help as well. They were always looking after Jessica and providing meals and just my mom also spent a few nights with James in the hospital. It was incredible how God brought into my life a lady by the name of Louise who walked with me. James was diagnosed a week after I met her, and she walked the journey with me with my anxiety. I received daily Bible verses and encouragement from Jenny Inglesby, and she used to come around and sing James songs on her guitar, and she even wrote a little song for James, which he absolutely loved. It always brought a smile to his face. I must say one thing I can't handle is kooky kids that are sick, and I just instantly feel sick. And I must say I was very concerned as to how on earth I was going to deal with this, knowing that James was going to be going through chemo and all this stuff. And it was absolutely amazing. I must tell you that not once did I ever have to deal with it. God made sure that either Mike or my mom or some friend was around at the time. And even the nights that I had to sleep at the hospital were the nights that James was fine. So yeah, God was really faithful in that. And looking back, we could really never have gone through this journey without God. He sustained us and he took care of us. Somebody during the journey once said to me, if you lose God, you lose everything. And that is so true. You turn your back on God, who do you turn to? Where do you go to? And we know he allows certain things to happen in people's lives. And we just need to trust that he knows what he's doing. Our lives are not meant to be comfortable while on this earth. He grows us, he stretches us to make us more like him.
Yeah, so that.
I mean, I think that, you know, as certainly as I'm listening to this, like I've spent the last 5 weeks completely immersed in the book of Job. And as I listen to your story, and just so everybody knows, Mike and Melanie and we did chat during the course of this week, but I actually tried to keep the sermon this week and their story not intertwined. So we didn't go into a lot of depth in terms of what was coming out, but it really just strikes me that this is modern day Job. This is what you're describing, and what you've been through is really his reality, and is everything that he went through. And it's just quite incredible. It just strikes me that you can go through this, you can suffer, you can experience all these things, and your faith in the Lord can remain intact. I mean, do you guys have anything to? We're going to run out of time in about 3 minutes, but you know, any last thoughts just on being sustained in the journey or after the journey that you want to leave us with?
Yeah, just one last thing for me is, for me, it was particularly difficult. This journey was particularly difficult because I'd struggled with anxiety throughout my adulthood. And this journey just basically exasperated my anxiety. I was, however, constantly reminded of the verse from Philippians 4, verse 6 and 7, which reads, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus." And I just kept focusing on the word thanksgiving. Thanksgiving was key for me, because instead of looking at all the bad things around me, I chose to focus on the word thanksgiving. And there were so many things to be thankful for during the journey. There were bad things, but there were so many good things. So that really encouraged me and helped me.
Yeah, I think what also keeps us going is, we know without a doubt that James is in heaven with Jesus and that we will see him again. I think, yeah, that's what keeps us going. Actually, just knowing that when we go to heaven, we will be reunited. We will be a complete family again, and that just keeps us going.
Well, Mike and Melanie, thanks so much. I want to just tie all that together with, I think, what's going to become quite a key verse from this morning's message. In James, I'm not, the irony of this is not missed upon me, but in James chapter 5 and verse 11, James talks about the examples of patience, examples of perseverance and suffering. And he talks about Job. He says, "You have heard of Job's perseverance and have seen what the Lord finally brought about." And we get stuck on, you've heard of Job's perseverance, and so we must be like Job. But the book of James is highlighting that You have seen what the Lord finally brought about. And twice, Mike's made the allusion that when his James died, he went to be with Jesus. Mike and Melanie are able to say, we have seen what the Lord finally brought about. I think my own tears that were shed were around the profoundness of this is better, that James's reward is in heaven. What better place to be after all of his suffering than with his Savior? And so wherever you might find yourself this morning, friends, in whatever stage of suffering, maybe you're in it, maybe you're coming out of it, maybe you're about to go into it and you don't even know it yet. We do have this eternal perspective. We have seen what the Lord has brought about. We know, like Job knew, like Mike and Melanie and Jessica know, that my Redeemer lives, that our Redeemer lives, and that our Redeemer is Jesus Christ. And that means that we don't get rescued out of the suffering. We don't get to bypass it, but that in the midst of the suffering, we can cling to a God who is good and merciful and compassionate. And our faith in him, although it might go all over the place in those moments, it can be clung to. And because of that and because of him, we can persevere. So Mike and Melanie, just on behalf of Southern Cross, I want to say thanks so much for sharing your story with us. Thank you so much for encouraging us. I think it has been so helpful. So please keep sharing that story, because I've no doubt that you will be a huge encouragement to others. I really do feel